Before I could protest, he stood up and extended his hand. I hesitated, looking at Henry, but he waved us off with a smile. Go ahead, show him how it's done. This is how it all began. My name is Vanessa, and I'm 60 years old. I've been married to Henry for 40 years, the man I ran away with when I was only 25. He was everything I ever wanted in a man, gentle, passionate, and adventurous. My parents thought he was unsuitable, too much of a dreamer, but I didn't mind. I was young and in love, so much so that I left everything to be with him. Looking back, I wonder if they were right. Do not misunderstand me. Henry's always been a good husband. Together, we created a life full of love, laughter, and 3 amazing children. Our children are now grown, married with families of their own, and scattered across the country. It's just me and Henry in our old house, which appears too quiet for 2 people who once thrived on chaos and adventure. The silence has grown louder over time. We continue to love each other, but something has changed. The fire that once burned so brightly between us has faded, replaced by a consistent, predictable warmth. At times, I find myself longing for the spark we once shared, a passion that now seems distant. I assumed these feelings were normal, something every couple experiences after decades together, until last night, when it began like any other evening. I was in the kitchen preparing Henry's favorite stew. As I stirred the pot, the aroma of garlic and herbs filled the air, and my thoughts turned to our children. I was wondering if Emily, our eldest child, would come to visit for Christmas this year. Just as I was about to call Henry for dinner, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a dish towel before going to answer it. Michael stood on the porch. Henry's younger brother Michael and Henry couldn't have been more dissimilar. Henry was consistent and dependable. Michael was unpredictable and charming. His smile could brighten any room, and his deep, husky voice was always tinged with mischief. Even at 30, he possessed a magnetic energy that drew people to him. Michael asked, surprised, "What are you doing here?" "Vanessa," he said, flashing that boyish grin of his, "is not any way to greet your favorite brother-in-law." I laughed, stepping aside to let him come in before you freeze. Michael shook the snow off his coat and stepped inside. "I was in town for work and thought I'd stop by. Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," I said, leading him to the living room. "Henry will be thrilled to see you." As Michael settled into the couch, Henry walked in, his face lighting up when he saw his brother. The 2 embraced, their laughter filling the room in a way that felt like a breath of fresh air. We spent the evening reminiscing about old times, sharing stories, and drinking wine. For the first time in ages, I felt truly alive. After dinner, Michael leaned back in his chair, a playful glint in his eye. "Vanessa, do you remember that time I taught you how to dance?" I laughed, shaking my head. "How could I forget? You stepped on my toes more times than I can account." "Hey, I wasn't that bad," he protested, fighting offense. "Henry, please back me up here." Henry chuckled. "You were terrible, Mike, but you persisted." "I will give you that," Michael grinned and turned to me, saying, "Come on, Vanessa, let's see if I've improved." Before I could protest, he stood up and extended his hand. I hesitated, looking at Henry, but he waved us off with a smile. "Go on, show him how it's done." Michael led me to the center of the room, his hand warm against mine. As the music played, he guided me in a slow, swaying dance. His touch was firm yet gentle, his movement surprisingly graceful. For a moment, it felt like we were the only 2 people in the world. I could feel his gaze on me, intense and unyielding, and it sent a shiver down my spine when the song ended. I pulled away, my heart racing. "You've definitely improved," I said, forcing in a laugh. Michael smiled, but his eyes lingered on me a moment too long. I turned to Henry, who was watching us with an unreadable expression. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Later that night, just as I lay in bed beside Henry and was drifting off to sleep, Henry spoke, his voice low and steady. "Vanessa, can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said, turning to face him. He hesitated as if choosing his words carefully. Do you ever miss the excitement we used to have? The question caught me off guard. Sometimes, I admitted, but I thought that was normal. He nodded, a faraway look in his eyes. I want you to be happy, Vanessa, truly happy. I am happy, I said, though the words felt hollow. Henry sighed and reached for my hand. I've been thinking that it's time we tried something new, something to reignite the spark. What do you mean? I inquired, my heart pounding. He looked at me with a serious and tender expression. I want you to spend the night with my brother. The words lingered in the air, heavy and unspoken. My mind raced through 1,000 questions, tumbling over one another. Have I misheard him? Was this some sort of joke? However, Henry's eyes told me he was serious. Henry, I don't understand, I whispered. Why would you recommend something like that? Because I love you, he said simply, and I want you to feel alive again. I stared at him, torn between disbelief and curiosity. The idea was absurd, scandalous even, yet a part of me couldn't deny the war. What would it mean for us, for our marriage, for me? The weight of Henry's words pressing down on me, I realized this was only the beginning of a story I never thought I'd be part of, a story that would change everything. At first Henry's suggestion sounded so absurd that I wanted to dismiss it outright, but as I stayed there clutching the sheets to my chest, I couldn't deny the flicker of something deep inside me, a curiosity, a hunger I hadn't felt in years, began to stir, and my heart raced with a mix of fear. Guilt and excitement. Was this madness, or was this a chance to rekindle something in me that had long been dormant? Henry left the room after a brief exchange, his footsteps fading as he descended the stairs. I tried to calm myself, taking deep breaths, but nothing could prepare me for what happened next. Minutes later, Henry returned, and this time he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was Michael. I sat up, my hands gripping the sheets tightly. Are you okay? To my chest as if they were a shield, my eyes darting between the two of them, my mind struggling to process the reality of what was unfolding. Michael stepped inside hesitantly, his hands shoved into his pockets. He wasn't wearing his coat anymore, just a plain shirt that stretched over his broad shoulders. His hair was slightly tousled, and his presence seemed to fill the room like an electric current. He glanced at me, and our eyes met. There it was again, that look. His eyes held a warmth, a softness, but also something darker, something that made my breath catch in my throat. He wasn't smiling now, his face was serious, contemplative, and so unbearably attractive that I had to look away, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks. Vanessa, Henry said, his voice calm and reassuring. He walked over and sat on the edge, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Are you okay? I nodded, though the rapid thumping of my heart betrayed my unease. Henry, are you certain about this? Is this truly what you want? Yes, he spoke firmly, but his tone was gentle. Vanessa, I saw how you and Michael danced tonight. I saw how you looked at each other and wondered if this is what you, or we, need. I blinked, struggling to understand what you were saying. Henry reached for my hand, and his touch reassured me. For years, we've been in a routine that is comfortable but has lost its spark. I see it in your eyes. Vanessa, I understand you've been looking for something more exciting. I couldn't deny it. I could feel a void growing between us, the absence of the passion that once defined our relationship. But why, Michael? I whispered, my voice shaking. Henry smiled faintly and looked at his brother. Because I trust him, I know he cares about you and will treat you as you deserve to be treated. I turned to face Michael, who was still standing near the doorway, his gaze fixed on me. He moved closer, his movements slow and deliberate, as if allowing me to process. Vanessa, Michael said, his voice low and soothing. I do not want to make you uncomfortable. If this is not what you want, simply say so, and I will leave. I swallowed hard, shifting my gaze between the two of them. Part of me wanted to scream and tell them both how ridiculous this was, but another part of me, the one I had buried beneath years of routine and responsibility, was intrigued. I turned back to Henry. Are you really okay with this? He nodded. I want you to be happy. Vanessa, and I know I can't give you what you need anymore. Maybe Michael can." The vulnerability in his voice broke something inside me. I realized that this wasn't just about me, it was about us. Michael moved closer, standing at the edge now, his gaze never left mine, and I felt a pull I couldn't explain. He reached out his fingers, brushing against my hand, and a jolt of warmth shot through me. "Vanessa," he murmured, his voice like velvet, "it's your choice." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded, my heart pounding. "Okay," I whispered, barely audible. Henry stood, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze before stepping back. My eyes widened. Henry smiled softly. "It's okay, Vanessa, trust me." But as he turned, instead of leaving, he pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down, his gaze steady, watching both of us. My heart raced, my eyes darting between Henry and Michael. I felt the tension in the room, thick in a mix of curiosity, nerves, and undeniable heat. "Henry," I whispered, clutching the sheets tightly against my chest, "what are you doing?" He sat in the chair, his expression calm but intense. "I want to stay," he said simply. "I want to see you happy. Vanessa, I want to watch you let go, to see you rediscover the part of yourself you buried for so long." His words sent shivers down my spine. I looked at Michael, who was watching me intently. He reached out his fingers and brushed against mine. "Are you okay with it?" he asked softly. I paused. My heart was pounding in my chest, and the room felt charged with an energy that I couldn't quite describe. Finally, I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper, "Yes." The silence was deafening. Michael sat on the edge, moving slowly and deliberately. I caught my breath as he reached for my hand again, his fingers warm and firm against mine. "You're amazing," Vanessa said, his voice soft but full of intensity. I blushed, my grip tightening on the sheets. Michael leaned closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "You don't have to be nervous. I'll take care of you," he said, sending shivers down my spine. He slowly reached up, brushing a strand of hair away from my face, and I felt my defenses begin to crumble. Michael leaned in, his lips hovering just inches from mine. When our lips met, the entire world seemed to dissolve around me. His kiss was soft at first, hesitant, as if giving me the opportunity to change my mind, but as I responded, leaning into him, his touch became more confident, demanding. Michael slid his hand to my waist, bringing me closer as the kiss intensified. I felt a fire ignite inside me, a passion I hadn't experienced in years. Every touch and movement was electric, sending waves of pleasure through me as the night progressed. Michael's touch was everything Henry had promised it would be, gentle yet passionate, respectful yet completely consuming. For the first time in decades, I felt truly desired and alive. I lost myself in Michael, in the warmth of his embrace, in the way he whispered my name like a prayer, and as the hours passed, I realized something I hadn't realized before. This wasn't just about reigniting passion, it was about rediscovering who I was, the woman I had been before life and routine dulled her edges. Henry shifted in his chair, the sound taking my attention away from the moment I looked at him, my lips tingling from Michael's kiss. He met my gaze, his expression gentle and encouraging. "It's okay," Henry said softly. "I want you to feel this, Vanessa." His words eliminated the last of my hesitancy. I returned my gaze to Michael, who was staring at me with such intensity that my heart raced. Michael's hands moved to my shoulders, his touch firm but gentle, and his eyes swept over me, taking me in, leaving me feeling vulnerable and exhilarated. "You're stunning," he said, his voice full of emotion. His hands moved slowly, examining the curves of my shoulders and the shape of my collar. Every touch was intentional, sending sparks of heat through me. He leaned in again, his lips touching mine. This kiss was deeper and more urgent. His hands slid down my back, drawing me closer until we were pressed together. I felt Henry's presence in the room, but instead of making me uncomfortable, it increased the thrill. Knowing he was watching made every touch, every kiss feel even more forbidden, more intense. Michael's lips moved away from my mouth, trailing a line of kisses down my neck, His hands searched everywhere, tracing over my arms and sides. My waist. He moved slowly, savoring every part of me. His lips found a sensitive spot just below my ear, and I let out a soft gasp as my fingers tingled in his hair. "Michael," I breathed, my voice trembling, as his hands slid lower, exploring the curve of my hip. He drew me closer, his movements steady and unhurried. His touch was unlike anything I'd felt in years, intense and reverent, as if I were something valuable to be treasured. I looked at Henry again, and his gaze was fixed on us. His expression was calm, but there was a heat in his eyes that mirrored mine. He gave me a small nod, and his presence kept me grounded even as I felt myself being swept away by Michael's touch. Michael's hands moved over my body, learning every curve and contour. His lips returned to mine, deeper and more demanding. My hands moved instinctively across his chest, feeling the warmth of his skin through the fabric of his shirt. "Vanessa," he murmured against my lips. His voice was thick with desire, and his hands moved again, exploring every inch of me, his touch igniting a fire that burns brighter with each moment. His lips followed, kissing, tasting, and saving me in a way that made my entire body tremble. Henry remained silent, his presence providing constant reassurance as I surrendered to the moment. Michael's touch was everything I had hoped for, tender yet passionate, respectful but completely consuming. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, my senses heightened, and every touch and kiss sent waves of pleasure through me. His hands continued to explore his lips, finding mine repeatedly, each kiss more intense than the last. I felt his breath on my skin. His movements became more deliberate and insistent, each moment felt like an eternity, and I never wanted it to end. Michael's touch, kiss, and presence were everything I didn't realize I needed, and Henry watched through it all, his expression filled with love and understanding as the night went on. I lost myself in Michael, in the warmth of his embrace, and in the way he whispered my name as if it were the most valuable word in the world. I felt a connection, a passion that I had thought was lost forever, but even as I surrendered to the moment, I couldn't stop wondering what this meant for us. Myself, Henry, and Michael, what would tomorrow bring? Could we go back to the way things were, or had we crossed a line that could not be reversed? The room felt frozen in time. The dim glow of the bedside lamp cast soft shadows on Michael's features, his eyes dark with desire as they swept over me. I couldn't take my gaze away from him. The intensity of the moment held me captive, and Henry remained in the corner of my vision. His quiet presence served as both a calming and thrilling force. Michael's hand slid up my arm, his touch deliberate and gentle. His fingers traced a path along my collarbone, and his thumb lightly touched my skin. I shivered as the sensation made my breath catch in my throat. Michael whispered, "You're so beautiful." His words washed over me, igniting something deep within. His other hand reached up and cradled my face, his touch warm and steady. He leaned in closer, his lips brushing against mine in a feather-like kiss that sent my heart racing. He whispered, "Relax," against my lips. "Allow me to take care of you." My hands trembled as I reached for him, my fingertips brushing against the fabric of his shirt. I paused for a moment before sliding my hands up and slowly unbuttoning it, one button at a time. My fingers brushed against his warm, firm chest, and I felt a rush of excitement run through me. Michael allowed me to explore his gaze, which never left mine, as if he was savoring every moment. Once his shirt was undone, he shrugged it off and let it fall to the ground. My gaze followed the lines of his chest, the strength in his shoulders, and the way his body exuded warmth and vitality. He leaned forward, his lips firmly pressing against mine. His hands moved to my sides, sliding over the curve of my waist, his touch firm but gentle. He drew me closer. The heat between us was palpable, a fire that grew brighter with each kiss and touch. Henry's chair creaked softly, indicating his presence. I looked at him, my cheeks flushed and my breathing uneven. He was watching. He looked at us intently, his expression calm but filled with something I couldn't quite identify. There was no jealousy or anger, just a quiet intensity as if he were experiencing the moment alongside us. "You're doing wonderfully." Henry spoke softly, his tone steady and reassuring. His words boosted my confidence, and I returned my gaze to Michael, who was watching me with a mix of desire and patience. He reached for me again, sliding his hand over my shoulders and down the length of my arms. "You're incredible, Vanessa," Michael whispered. "I've wanted this for so long." His confession sent a shiver through me, both thrilling and terrifying. His lips found mine again, and this time there was no hesitation. The kiss was deep and consuming, his hands exploring my body with a reverence that made my heart ache. Michael's hands moved lower, tracing the curve of my hips, his touch igniting every nerve ending. His lips left a trail of kisses along my jawline down the column of my neck, each one sending a jolt of pleasure through me. I felt his breath against my skin, warm and tantalizing. As his hands continued their exploration, his fingers brushed against my ribs, then slid down to my waist, tracing the curve of my body. He moved slowly, taking his time as if savoring every moment. He whispered sweet words against my ear, and it made my heart race, a mix of vulnerability and exhilaration flooding through me. I felt his hands on my thighs, his touch firm and steady as he pulled me closer. I glanced at Henry again, my breath catching at the sight of him. He was leaning forward slightly, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on us. There was a quiet intensity in his expression, a mix of love and longing that made my chest tighten. "Henry," I whispered, my voice trembling. He met my gaze, his eyes soft and full of understanding. "I'm here, Vanessa," he said gently. "You're safe. You're doing incredibly well." I turned back to Michael, his lips found mine again. His kiss was deep and consuming, his hands explored my body with a hunger that made my pulse race. His touch was everywhere, tracing the curve of my spine, sliding over my hips, exploring every inch of me with a reverence that left me breathless. "Michael," I murmured, my voice barely audible. He lifted his head, his eyes meeting mine. "Tell me what you need." "Vanessa," he said softly, "I'm here for you." His words broke something inside me, a dam of emotion I hadn't realized I'd been suppressing. I reached for him, sliding my hand over his shoulders and bringing him closer. "I need you, I do," I whispered. Michael responded with a kiss that took my breath away. His hands moved to my waist, lifting me slightly as he shifted closer. I felt his strength, his warmth, and I melted against him, my body responding to his every touch. Time seemed to blur as we moved together, our bodies aligning perfectly. Every touch, kiss, and whispered word was a testament to our connection, a bond that felt both new and deeply familiar. As the night progressed, I became engrossed in Michael's rhythm, the warmth of his touch, and the depth of his kiss. Every moment felt like a revelation, a rediscovery of a part of myself that I had thought was lost. When we finally separated, we were out of breath, and the room was silent except for the sound of our labored breathing. My heart was racing, but I felt a deep sense of calm, of completeness. Michael stood beside me, his chest rising and falling steadily. His arm wrapped around my waist, drawing me closer to him as if he couldn't bear the thought of letting go just yet. His lips brushed against my temple, a gentle, tender touch that made my heart swell. "It was amazing," he said, his voice low and reverent. I turned to him and ran my fingers lightly over his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my fingertips. "It was," I whispered, my voice full of surprise. Before I could continue, I felt a shiver beside me. Henry had moved closer, his presence warm and reassuring. He leaned over, his eyes filled with a love so profound that it nearly took my breath away. Without saying anything, he pressed a kiss on my forehead, lingering for a moment before pulling back to look at me. "I'm very proud of you," he said. Softly, his voice filled with emotion, I blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the depth of his love and acceptance. Henry wrapped his arms around me, drawing me into a tight embrace that made me feel safe and loved for a moment. I was enveloped in his warmth, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat calming the storm of emotions raging within me. When he pulled back, his hand lingered on my cheek, his thumb wiping away a tear I hadn't noticed had fallen. "You are everything to me, Vanessa," he said. "You would always be." The three of us settled in on the mattress, the night's tension and excitement giving way to a peaceful shared intimacy. I stayed in the middle, between Michael on one side and Henry on the other. Michael's arm remained draped over me, his fingers lazily tracing patterns across my skin. Henry rested his hand on my other side, his grip firm and comforting. I felt cocooned. In their warmth and love, they formed a strange but beautiful mate connection. As I sat there listening to their slow and even breathing, I never imagined that a bond could exist that defied conventional understanding. I felt a sense of calm wash over me, my eyes grew heavy, and I let myself fall asleep, the weight of the night melting into the comfort of their embrace. The first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, illuminating the room in soft golden tones. I awoke gradually, my body pleasantly sore. My heart was full, and Michael was still sleeping, his arms still protecting me. I turned to see Henry awake, sitting beside me with a soft smile on his face. "Good morning," he said, his voice soft and gentle. "Good morning," I responded, my voice still heavy with sleep. Henry reached for my hand, intertwining his fingers with mine. "How are you feeling?" he inquired. I paused for a moment, replaying the night's events in my mind. "I feel whole," I said finally, as if a piece of myself that I had no idea was missing had been discovered. Henry's smile deepened, and he leaned down to kiss my forehead once more. "That was all I ever wanted for you, Vanessa, to feel alive and loved in every way possible." I squeezed his hand tightly. "I love you, Henry," I said, my voice full of emotion. "I don't think I've ever loved you more than I do right now, and I love you," he said, his voice firm and confident. "This doesn't change us, Vanessa. It only makes us stronger." Michael stirred beside me, his eyes fluttering open, a sleepy smile spread across his face as he looked at me, his hand moving to brush a strand of hair from my face. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," I said, smiling back at him. His eyes flicked to Henry, and for a moment the two men exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher. There was no tension, no awkwardness, only understanding and mutual respect. "Thank you," Michael said quietly, his gaze lingering on his brother. Henry nodded, his expression warned that we're family, he said simply. The three of us stayed there for a while longer, basking in the quiet comfort of the morning. There was no need for words. The silence was filled with unspoken emotions, a shared understanding that went beyond language. Eventually, Michael sat up, stretching lazily. "I should probably get going," he said, though there was no urgency in his voice. I sat up too, the sheets pulling around my waist. "You don't have to rush," I said softly. He smiled, his hand reaching out to cup my cheek. "I'll be back," he promised. Michael leaned in and kissed my lips before standing up. He gave Henry a silent nod of gratitude before gathering his belongings and leaving. After Michael left, Henry and I stayed in bed, the morning light casting a warm glow on us. He drew me into his arms and held me close as if he didn't want to let go. "Are you okay?" he inquired, his voice full of genuine concern. I nodded, my head resting on his chest. "I am," I replied. The night had changed us, but it had also brought us closer, reminding us of the depth of our connection and the strength of our commitment. Henry kissed the top of my head, his arms tightening around me. "As long as you're happy, Vanessa, that's all that matters." And in that moment, I knew that our love was unshakable, a bond that could withstand anything.